Welcome to episode 91, The Lost Art of Communication.
Welcome to the PR Playbook Podcast, the only podcast giving you actionable skills and advice you need to execute a strategic PR program. Warning: what you hear next may lead to brand awareness and increased sales and customer exposure. Now here's your host, Rinjini Joshua.
Hello, and welcome to episode 91, The Lost Art of Communication. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Sharon Christiaan, the author of The Lost Art of Communication and behavioral scientist and author. She's going to talk about today just kind of the different nuances of communicating, what you should be looking into when you're communicating with others, whether it's relationships, professionals. I think this is really important, really focusing on, the last couple of years where we have to learn how to communicate better than we've had to in the past. And I think she has these beautiful principles that I think we should all follow in our personal and professional life. Hello, hello, Sharon. How are you doing this morning?
Hi, and thank you for inviting me onto your podcast.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have this conversation. I think this is a good little reminder for everyone to have, and maybe a little wake-up call as well for some people who don't really, we're not communicating with people or interacting with them in a physical sense. So I think a lot of people just forget what other people are also human.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so if you don't mind starting off, giving us a quick background on yourself and how you started writing this new book that you're writing.
Okay, so when I was young, I always wanted to have my own business. But as a result of my father and his work, I ended up changing schools 17 times. And I actually moved not only from one side of Australia to the other, but also to the other side of the world where I didn't speak the language. So when I finished school, I didn't have enough grades to go to university. And I felt really lost and disheartened and had no idea what I wanted to do. So I ended up working in a shoe store, at McDonald's, at my local cinema. And then finally, I went back to night school and then to university in the evenings. And finally, I became a lawyer after 6 hard years of study. And so back in 2001, I moved from Australia to the UK and worked as an immigration lawyer, getting British people to Australia. So to basically create their dreams and start this whole new world, a life in a warm, sunny place. So that was amazing. So business was fantastic. I had up to 400 clients at any one time and super busy, but fantastic. And then around 2012, we had a change of government. And they realized there was a massive backlog in visa applications. So their solution was to actually shut the door to immigration, effective immediately. But as a result of that, I couldn't finish visa applications. I couldn't take on any more clients. So effectively, through one stroke of the pen, my business was annihilated. And I was just, my world was ripped apart from one moment to the next, and I didn't see it coming. And so I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and then realized that I was going to go back to university. And because what I realized was that after changing schools 17 times, I'd become really good at reading silent messages. I've been rejected, and there was lots of resistance when you're growing up, going through different schools and always being the new person. And so I studied a master's in behavioral science. And at this time, I was also working in compliance. And what I realized was it's all good and well to have policies and procedures, but if you don't have the behaviors to drive them, then it's a waste of time. So during this time, I studied, my main focus was, why is it some people more effective at communicating than others? And so I read hundreds of articles and research by the greatest scholars ever, going back as far as Aristotle on philosophy, psychology, behavioral science, communication. And what I did was I got the very best concepts in communication and behavioral science and created a communication framework to help people with their relationships, with their recognition, and with their results. Because people are really, we have predictive behaviors. Then what happened was during the pandemic, I was actually working as a consultant, but then had to, and sorting out methodologies, communication, outdated methodologies in other organizations, and to try and help with customer service and all that jazz. Anyway, what I realized in the pandemic was that we're being locked down. It's really restrictive. And I remembered my grandparents, and they did it really tough during the war. And so they were my mentor and my inspiration. And because of the situation they were in the war, they learned all about silent messages. They learned how to communicate on a completely different level. And so I wrote a book, and it's called The Lost Art of Communication Intelligence. And it goes through the 5 principles of, I believe, fundamental communication to help people post-pandemic, because what's happened at the moment, 30% of the workforce were made redundant during the pandemic. That's a lot of people. As a result, there's a lot more artificial intelligence. On a daily basis, our jobs are being threatened by computers and by machines. And also what's happened is, as a result of the pandemic and the acceptance of remote working, we're not just competing against our local talent pool. We're now competing against the whole world. I think the humans have to realize we cannot compete with computers for memory speed and accuracy. It's just not possible. But what we can do is enhance our human-to-human relationships so that we can inspire, empower, and unite people. So that's when I thought, well, I'm going to write this book. I think it's an amazing time to write a book about moving forward. I think also what's fundamental at the moment is there's been a lot of demonstrations, as we've seen during the pandemic. There's a lot of issues that are coming to the surface. And our unintentional behaviours in the past are having a massive effect and impact on others. And we have to realise there are new expectations and new social norms out there. And there's a lot of people who have started jobs remotely and they've never met their teams. So the book goes through 5 principles. And the reason I've done it in a story is, with all my research, I'd read the most amazing stuff. I'd get to the end of the chapter and I go, oh, I can't actually remember all the stuff I've read because it was just too much information. So I wanted to write a book that was engaging, that people could relate to, but in a story fashion, and weave the 5 principles into the story.
And I really appreciate that because nowadays we're talking more about storytelling, and perceivably, this is not always the case, but perceivably a lot of journalists and reporters say they want to have more of the story of a brand and the story of a company rather than just the pitch, which sometimes I believe that's true. Sometimes I believe that's not, depending on if it's news or what's going on in that particular industry or market. So I think telling this in a story format is really interesting. And I think understanding the 5 principles, you had mentioned them to me the other day, and I think I really love these 5 principles. I think they're universal. I think they go across all types of communication platforms, whether you're speaking to your parents, your kids, or your boss. So let's dive into that a little bit. Let's dive into those 5 principles and unveil what those are.
Okay. So the first principle is awareness. And this really looks at self-awareness and also verbal and non-verbal cues. But let's start with self-awareness. I think people in our very busy world, they don't realize that we're being judged all the time. So you are constantly communicating with the world, whether it's the clothes you wear, if you've got a coffee mug and it's got some sort of statement on there, the people you associate with, the state of your office, whether or not you're on time, all of these things, you're communicating to the world information about yourself. Also, it's your web shadow. It's very important because everyone looks everybody up on social media and they're making judgments about people. So I think part of that is, in the past we were saying there's verbal and nonverbal communication, and nonverbal communication was basically body language. Well, actually nonverbal goes beyond body language to all these other elements. The second principle is empathy. So that's looking at, not only should you be aware of yourself, you should also be aware of the person who you're speaking to. Because a lot of people, when they speak, they assume a few things about the listener. They assume the listener is giving exactly the same meaning to words that you intend. They're assuming the listener is giving their undivided attention, that they've put away all their worries and concerns and they're 100% focused. And they're also assuming that they've taken in and believed every word that's been said. But in fact, you have 30 seconds to impress your listener. And during those first 30 seconds, they're going to sit there and go, have I heard it all before? Do I believe you? Am I actually interested in what you have to say? So these things are really fundamental to be aware when you're speaking to someone. On top of that, whatever you say, it's actually perceived through the listener's preconceived ideas and their biases, so their experiences. So I think when you're speaking, it's really important to understand who you're speaking to. The third one is interaction. Interaction is all about the laws of human behavior. So it's things like likability, reciprocity, and authority. So if we look at that, if someone likes you, they're more willing to listen to you. If you have a good reputation and you're the authority, there's more chance they're going to listen to you. There's also group psychology. So people behave completely differently when they're in a group. So we look at things like that. The fourth one is observation. Now, under observation, we look at the fourth principle of communication, which is actually time and space and feedback. So this is something like if you ring someone up at 9 a.m. on Monday morning and you're asking all these questions, you probably won't get as good a response as if you ring them, say, Tuesday at 11 o'clock after morning tea.
We talked about this, and it's so funny because a lot of media will also give you, in our different databases, they'll give you, to call me between 9 and 11 a.m. or call me at this time on Tuesday or whatever. So some media will actually give you these parameters. And then also, I think it also goes to respecting the boundaries of people now that we're at home. We talked a little bit about this the other day and just understanding that we all have different things that we're doing. And like you said, I think one of the examples we were talking about was Friday at 4:55. We don't call somebody with a request at the end of the week, end of the day, giving them some urgent request because you're probably not going to get a favorable response, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Time and space is really important. It's like, if you come, I'm saying this because at the moment during lockdown, a lot of women have had their husbands come home and the kitchen is the woman's domain. They're cooking, the radio's on. And if a man comes in and changes the station on the radio or the TV and parks themselves down, instantly the female's horns go up because her space has been invaded.
Yeah,
it's not a good time to have a discussion if you're in her domain. Go for a walk. Be on neutral territory. Things like that make a massive difference to the success of a conversation.
That's really interesting. Yeah, sometimes I do get calls like first thing in the morning at 8 o'clock on Monday, and you're like, "Oh, I'm not ready for this. I'm not ready for this conversation," and so you become defensive or maybe react in a way that you normally wouldn't want to have reacted. And I think that's really important for people to understand and maybe also understand about themselves, right?
Absolutely.
To even say, hey, can I call you back in an hour when I'm mentally ready for this conversation?
I think the hint there is also to say, and we're all guilty of not doing this, but when you ring or you contact someone, say, is this time convenient? If it's not, when's it convenient for you? And instantly you take the pressure off. And the bottom line is we're all really busy. We're multitasking. And whenever someone calls you, they're interrupting your thought patterns and whatever's going on in your head. So it takes a few minutes to sort of get your head around, how can I help you? So to be prepared. And what we were talking about before is those boundaries and say, look, if someone's got something very urgent and they want it done yesterday, to say, look, you are at the top of my list. I'm just in the process of finishing this. I'll call you back or I'll give you, this will be done, tomorrow by 4 o'clock or whenever it is. And when you give people an expectation and if you show patterns of being reliable, it eases their anxiety and makes life a lot easier for everyone.
As you can see, this is definitely a point of contention. You went through the other points just fine until we got to time and space. I think I think this is in the working world. It's a big issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's even when, you're working and someone interrupts you. If you're on your computer, you're deep in thought, and someone comes along and you're trying to listen in one ear and look at emails, you've got to be strong and say, actually, just give me 10 minutes. I need to finish what I'm doing. Then I'll have the time. We can grab a coffee, or we can, just give me time to finish this. But we try and be efficient and double task. It doesn't work. The brain can't focus on two things at once, not properly.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point. Okay, I will let you continue. I think we're close to 5 here.
Yeah. So the fifth one is understanding. The fifth is understanding. So that it actually goes AEIOU, so people can remember what they are.
Oh, I love it.
And so U is understanding. So under that, the world is a new place. We've got new people of influence, new people with a voice, and we have to understand there are new social norms and new expectations, and that we have a choice and about how we do communicate. So the fifth principle basically wraps up all the others and weaves them together.
Yeah, I love that. AEIOU, that's a good one.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit. So has this book come out already? Are we already published?
No, it's coming out. It's just about to come out. So do you want me to tell you a little bit about the story behind it?
Yes, please. That would be fantastic.
Do you want the story, the backstory, or the story of the book?
Oh goodness. I think the backstory is always more interesting. We can read the book.
Okay. So the backstory is it's actually based on my grandparents. So what actually happened was, during the Second World War, or just before the Second World War, my grandfather, he was 23 and he'd gotten a job in Holland in the Justice Department. And not long after starting, he was assigned to a refugee camp in Holland. And it was for Jewish people who were coming from Germany and Austria. So they put them in this safe refugee camp in Holland. But then the Nazis came over and took over Holland, and this refugee camp actually became a transit camp, and these people were put on trains to death camps in the east, or say to Poland and stuff. But they didn't know they were death trains. They actually thought they were going to a labor camp. So what ended up happening was my grandfather, his job at the camp was to register all the Jewish people coming through, people like Anne Frank. But as time went on, and these people that went on these trains, they never heard from them again. And so they started getting really concerned. So my grandfather and my grandmother, they joined the resistance movement in Holland. And my grandfather was in this position of power because he had the registration cards. He could actually remove registration cards because there were no computers, there were no records. It was just those little cards. So what happened was the camps were actually, the senior management of the camp were run by the Nazis, but the camp itself were run by the Jewish people, the prisoners. But unfortunately, they had to make them decide who was going on these trains these death trains. So they put Jew against Jew, which was the most horrific thing to do from one prisoner anyway. So what happened was my grandfather helped save the lives of many people by removing their registration cards, because if they didn't know who was in the camp, they couldn't go on the trains. And he was also in charge of food distribution. So the trucks that came in with food, they could smuggle people out. So with the help of the resistance movements and other people within the camp, they ended up saving about 300 people, which is quite amazing. But, it was a very traumatic time. My grandparents were surrounded by death and fear the whole time. And
Sure.
They did notice towards the end of the war that there were bigger numbers in the camp that were registered. So suddenly they're like, something's going on. And they did manage to smuggle some out, but some actually stayed in the camp. So my grandfather was investigated, and if he'd been found out, he would have been either shot straight away or put on one of these things. He wasn't discovered, but he ended up getting really sick with stomach ulcers, and they removed him from the registration. They just had him on food distribution, and it was really touch and go. And then finally the war comes to an end. The commanders and all his staff are taken away and they're arrested. And my grandfather ends up being the commander of this camp and liberates everyone, and they raise the flag, and it's all, wow, wonderful stuff. And so my grandparents were really my inspiration and my mentors, and the amount they learnt during the war years on silent messages, that communication was just at a whole different level, and those laws of human behavior. So when I wrote the book, I thought, I want to keep their memory alive. I do want to keep alive what happened, to these people. And I could see parallels with lockdown. We all became a prisoner of this dreadful, situation and this virus. And there were so many people dying, and we were just so blessed not to have bombs falling out of the sky or going onto trains, but people were going in cars to hospital and not coming back. So I wanted to have something that was relatable. So all the principles are weaved within this story.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. So are you telling the story through a certain person's point of view, or is it just kind of the retelling of events?
No. So the story is actually about a lawyer whose career's on track, but her relationships are in tatters because she's so focused on her career. She just needs to, get on top of all of her work that everything else falls by the wayside. So she hears about this manuscript that was written during the Second World War, and it holds the secret to meaningful relationships and lasting happiness. So she thinks, I need to get hold of this. So she goes on this quest to find this manuscript. And so as it all has to do with psychological warfare. It talks about, at the moment, about artificial intelligence. It's talking about social media with personalization and relevance, and all that stuff is in it as well. And so as she finds the different principles to the manuscript, she can relate it to her own life and how it affects her life, and how she can make changes in her life to improve her relationships.
Okay. Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, it sounds like she's going through enough different communication challenges that she can address each one of those points, those 5 points.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I think the big nugget out of this, I mean, this can be applied anywhere, as we've said, but the big nugget out of this is really communicating for us to the public, right? So I like to end most of these podcasts with some actionable tips on how we can communicate better, or take the information that we've received and put it into action. So especially now when the digital world is so noisy, what are a few tips that kind of you have as far as best practices for companies to communicate with their audiences right now? What do you think they should be keeping in mind as we are building messages in this very, very noisy digital world?
Okay, so I think if it's a virtual communication like we're having, be very aware of your background, because people are judging you, and still be professional. Even though it's more casual, people expect to have a far more, they want to be dealing with someone who they can trust and be professional. And check out your own web shadow. It's really important for your own reputation. I think being aware of who you are, and then of your audience. And I think it's really important to speak people's language. So if you're talking to a builder, he talks about the foundations. He's talking about, windows of opportunity. So speak in his language. If it's someone in IT, you're talking about connections. You're talking about agility and collaboration. So whenever I speak to someone, I try and find out a little bit about their background, and then try and speak in their language and put some key words in there. And you'll see them smile because they think, oh my goodness, we're on the same page. She understands me. So I think that's really interesting. I think with interaction, if people like you, sometimes it's difficult. So the time is really important. So try not to look at communication barriers. And if it's the wrong time, try not to ring them, contact people at the wrong time. You're increasing your chances tenfold if you get the timing right and the place right. So sometimes people are communicating on trains and giving information. It's not the best time.
Definitely not when you're on the go or busy or doing in the middle of something.
Again, and then I think it's just saying to people, is this the right time? Is there some time that's a little bit more convenient for you? Goes a long way.
Do you think there's a right way to kind of put up those boundaries too from the receiving end? Yes, of course, it's good for me to be mindful as I'm reaching out to others, but what if I'm on the receiving end of poor communication?
It depends on the circumstances, but I think you respectfully say to people, look, with the greatest respect, this isn't the right time, or with the greatest, I can't really hear you at the moment, the line's bad, whatever it is. But you're looking for the best result in any form of communication. And it's a two-way street. Any form of communication is a two-way street. So I think the world is so fast and we're always trying to do things really quickly, but sometimes slowing down and getting the right time, you're going to increase your chances, honestly, tenfold by getting the timing right and the place right. And people will respect you. You'd be amazed how many people will respect you when you say, actually, give me a few moments or give me a day. And if you say to someone, look, you are at the top of my list, you are a priority, that people settle down because they want to know that you have their best interests at heart. And if you verbally say that, then they take a deep breath and they can relax a little bit and go, okay, they understand. People want to be understood. People want people to care about whatever is being done for them.
Yeah, I think the reliability factor is a big one too, because I think, maybe 5-6 years ago, I'm a multitasker. So I'm always moving very, very fast. And I think my husband's a little bit more tamed, I guess. And so he would always tell me to slow down and you don't have to respond right away, or, and I think, when you're trying to impress people, you feel like this sense of urgency of getting back to them right away or responding in a manner that you think is timely, which may not necessarily be what they're thinking as well. I think taking time to really think about a response, or taking time to put some additional thought, or even taking time to create a space where you can have a better conversation is so important. And like you said, well respected, because I think I remember, this is a long, long time ago. I put this to bed a long time ago, but I don't take phone calls in my car anymore. And I don't take phone calls in certain periods, even though, maybe I don't have a bunch of time in the day and that would be the only time. I can't take notes properly in a car. So, just thinking about how you function better, and then how you can communicate better as a result of that, putting yourself in the right situations. And I think slowing down is a very good, very good little key tip that I think everyone can have.
I think the key there is just, if you've got these emails, just say, I have got your email. So you've acknowledged the person, say, I've got your email. I'll be able to respond properly whenever it is. And then they go, oh, look, they've got it. They know I'm on radar. And what you're doing is you're constantly training up people of your behaviors. So if they know you respond, it's like a text message. If you respond straight away, they respond straight away. If you respond in half an hour, they will actually respond in half an hour. If you respond in a day, people will copy you. It's the reciprocity. So whatever you're doing, people are watching and monitoring your behavior, and they will respond in the same way.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I think it's unintentional, right? It's just, you don't even think about it. It happens that way. That's very true. Like there's certain people that I text with that are fast and some that are slow. And I kind of mirror that same thing.
Absolutely.
That's really interesting. I love this area of behavior and communication. Obviously, I've been in communication for 20 years. So this is always very interesting. So when can we expect this book to come out?
I've just come back from the printers.
Great.
In the next 2 weeks, it will be on Amazon. And so I'm having two things, because I also do corporate training. So the books will be part of my corporate training. And
Great.
Then they'll be also available online for ebooks and for print. So
and where can people find you online?
Online. So it's just www.SharonChristiaan with 2 A's at the end.co.uk.
Perfect. And we'll have a link to the book, and we'll have a link to your website in our show notes as well. But thank you so much, Sharon, for joining me today. This was a lovely conversation, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. It's been wonderful.
Okay. Well, have a fantastic day, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye.